latest workshop on ArcGIS Pro. Super excited to meet you all virtually and launch into this with you. So before we start, I just tell you a little bit about who we are. We are, I'm going to show you our faces in a minute, but we are all part of the Division of Ag and Natural Resources out of the University of California. Many of you are also part of UC ANR, and we really believe in connecting people with the research from UC to make a difference in everybody's lives. And to do that, we have a network of folks around the state. We have cooperative extension advisors. We have research and extension centers. We've got affiliated campuses where cooperative extension specialists like me work. And we also are organized through a bunch of statewide programs, things like 4-H or CalFresh or UCIPM. Many of you are familiar with them and work with them. And one of those statewide programs is Informatics and GIS. And that's the statewide program that I run with my wonderful staff who you're going to meet in a moment. And we really want to help you integrate cutting edge geospatial tools into your everyday work. We really think data, maps, informatics, all these kinds of things are critical to make our work better, cleaner, and to tell our story. So that's why we're here. Who are we? Well, I'm Maggie Kelly. I'm the director of the statewide program in Informatics and GIS. And Sean Hogan is also part of Informatics and GIS. He's a PhD in remote sensing. He's going to be running the workshop. I'm going to be doing a presentation to set the stage. And then in the background, we have Ben Satzman. He's an undergrad at UC Berkeley, and Robert Johnson. He works down at the Kearney Research and Extension Center. So those guys are going to be behind the scenes. If you have any trouble, pop it into chat. Say, this isn't working for me or whatever. In the past, we have experimented with pulling you into breakout rooms to see what's going on. But anyway, we want this to work for you. So we're here to help you. So don't be shy. So that's who we are. And who you are a bunch of folks from mostly California, but we also have some people from around the world. And just so we can get to know you a little bit better, can you put in the chat, just kick it off, your name, what you might want to get out of this workshop, your experience with Pro, from 1 being a beginner to 5 being an expert. And don't worry if you're 1, because we are thrilled to have you. So anybody want to kick it off? We've got Natalie. So anybody else want to kickstart? Your name, what you hope to get from this workshop, what your experience with ArcGIS Pro is. 1 beginner, 5 expert. I got the chat here, so I'm waiting with bated breath to see. You guys are all shy today? All right, there we go. Great, Jeff, wonderful, terrific. Oh, maybe it was just pause for me. Jeff, more experience, got experience of 2, just some fundamentals, 2. Paulina, a beginner. Mickey, hopefully you can use this for your research. Absolutely right. Great. Lion, nice to meet you. Beginner, very little experience with GIS, hoping to get some basics. Wonderful. Nice to have you, Joaquin. Shay, transition from ArcMap to Pro. Thank you, Shay. You're going to absolutely love this transition. I cannot tell you. I am so glad I made that change. Joyce, always in need of intro to Arc Pro. Likewise. Oh, hey, Joyce. Nice to have you. Hope to get comfortable building the maps. A beginner, Natalie. Terrific, Angela. Excited to learn the desktop. Wonderful, Emily. Great. Jessica, I used ArcGIS a long time ago, not for long. Yeah, good, good. You're in the right place, because Pro is really slick and so much fun after you get over the initial kind of bumps, but we're big fans. Yvette, beginner here, learn the basics. Seeing a beginner, great. All right, this is going to be a lot of fun, you guys. I am going to keep the chat window here, but if I lose sight of something, Ben and Sean can flag me up. But it's super nice to have you all. So what are we going to do today? We're going to talk about Pro, and we're going to talk about GIS. And GIS does a lot of things, and we teach, year-long courses in this, but I just kind of want to boil this down to some essential workflows. So you can do things like data collection, obviously from the field, or digitizing on screen, or digitizing a map. You can scan stuff, so you can create data. Really core step, you can link attribute data from a field or a table to spatial data. And you're going to do this in lab today. So we're going to have a data set of trees, and we have an Excel file of information about those trees, and we need to link them. Very core. Querying the data. So after you've done this join, you need to search by location or attribute. Spatial join. It's another way of saying, I've got this point here, give me some information about its thing that's next to it. You can do overlays. You can geocoding, which means turning a text address into a spatial feature. Do things like geo-enrichment, which is pull information, again, into a point or a line or polygon. Look at distance and buffers. Do surface interpolations, predict values in between points. We can do data wrangling, getting things all lined up in terms of aggregating or resampling. You can work with topography, slope, aspect, hill shades. And another aspect of that, hydrologic modeling. Think about how to create watersheds and how to look at where streams are running. We can do analyses like site suitability or finding risk. We can incorporate remote sensing into our work. We can find networks or routes through things. We can find spatial patterning in our data. All of that is GIS and so much more. And also core and a deep abiding love of mine, map making maps, making them beautiful, making them useful, and then putting them on the web in terms of web maps and web apps. So this is kind of the GIS world. I've collapsed a lot of it into one slide, but you get the gist. It's all about spatial data. And we're going to focus today at Lynn Cove, which is one of our research and extension centers in the southern Central Valley of California. It's a citrus site, a lot of work on citrus varietals. And we're going to show you some really gorgeous, you're going to work with some really gorgeous data from some of these orchards in Lynn Cove. The data that we're going to work with today, Sean's assembled this great database for you guys. So there's a digital surface model that we created from drone imagery flying over Lynn Cove. That's the shot on this picture on the left. Those black polygons on there, those are different fields where different varietals and experiments are monitored. One of the first things you're going to do in this lab is take the point layer of the trees in one of those fields and join it to this Excel file that says something about the trees. Like I said, this is a really core way of bringing in non-spatial data into space, into a spatial framework. You're also going to work with some drone imagery, some UAV imagery. From the left here, you have a multispectral camera that's of a particular field and the trees inside that field. The middle picture is a digital surface model, which is the shape of the trees that's also derived from the drone imagery. And the shot on the right is called NDVI, Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. It's a quick index that tells us something about the vegetation that we see on this field. So in this case, the greener means more vegetation, more vigorous vegetation. So this is going to be some of the spatial data that you're going to play with in lab. And at the end of the day, you're going to make a gorgeous map, something like this, that tells us something about the weight or the yield of each individual tree. And it's got these map elements. It looks great as a standalone figure, say, for a publication. So we're going to get you through all of that. But let's start back and talk about what is this thing called GIS that we're going to be working in. So GIS stands for Geographical Information System. The sort of traditional definition of it is it's a computer system for acquiring data, managing data, analyzing data, and disseminating the results of that data. And the gist of it is that you take the 3D world in all its complexity and you strip it into these two-dimensional layers that represent certain features on the Earth. So you can have a layer that represents elevation, that's your digital elevation model or digital terrain model. You can have an imagery layer that's taken from a drone or an aircraft or a satellite. You can represent these parcels, in this case, as polygons or lines or points. And everything in GIS is made possible and powerful because those layers are lined up so that you can drop a pin down through them and get to their real world coordinate on the surface of the Earth. So we take the structure of the complexity of the world in 3D, we strip it down into these 2D layers, and then we reassemble them together in the geographic information system. And one thing to remember is these layers are representations of reality. You make a lot of choices in the way that those data layers are depicted, but it's pretty good. And the way I think about GIS, it's all about the workflow. So it's all about what's the question, what's the problem you've got to get to, what's the data I need to assemble, what's the analysis steps I need to do, how do I create a nice visualization or display? And then did this process, this from left to right, did it answer my question? Did it make an impact? So this is kind of my core way of thinking about GIS. What's the question? What's the data? What's the analysis? What's the visualization? And then does it, can you draw an arrow from the output back to the question? Did you do your job? And the core thing we need to talk about with GIS is that first step, the data. And many of you know GIS, and so we still talk about this representation of the world as broken down into two very different representations of the real world: vectors and rasters, or features and grids. But let's stick with vector and raster. Vector are these points, lines, and polygons. Points is the core. Lines are made up of multiple points. Polygons are made up of multiple lines. It's a very location-based data representation or data model, has an X and a Y is the core of everything. That X and Y is defined precisely. That spatial information is explicit. Every point carries with it an X and Y. Every line carries with it a from node and a to node, and it knows the spatial location of those. Every polygon, every vertex in that polygon carries with it its spatial information. And the spatial information is attached to that attribute information. Contrast that with raster data. Raster is a regular array or a grid or a series of pixels that depict the world as a continuous surface. So every grid cell has one value associated with it. Spatial information is is implied. It's implicit, not explicit. The location of each cell is basically a row and a column. It's just like a giant matrix. And so it doesn't carry with it as much baggage as the vector data does. So in some routines are a lot faster with raster data, but they're really dramatically different. They're two different ways of looking at the world. They're both important. We use both of them all the time. We go back and forth between both of them all the time, but just to highlight the differences there. So common raster data examples might be digital elevation model, or data from remote sensing, or data from land use and land cover, or downscale climate data. These are very commonly used raster data sets. Common vector data sets, points might be your samples, your trees that you're going to use today, centroids, address locations, point clouds. You might also have lines like transportation or hydrography or contours or transects. And polygons might be land use or census or firesheds or soil or ownership boundaries, counties, et cetera, states. So points, lines, and polys are vector. Grids are rasters. And when we talk about GIS, we can talk about this raster vector split. We can also talk about what are the formats that you're going to encounter. What are the file formats that you're going to encounter? And in the Esri world, we have a couple of different formats for our files. For vector data, an older one is called the shapefile format, but a lot of you probably have encountered shapefiles. They're still extremely common, and they look like this little depiction here on the left, where somebody sends you a shapefile as a zipped up file, and when you unzip it, it's just a bunch of these individual files. The whole thing together is a shapefile. Each of those individual files gives you some information about the points or the lines or the polygons that you're working with. But more commonly for vector data, we use Esri's local file format of choice, which is the geodatabase, which is essentially a container that you can put your points, your lines, your polygons, and you can explicitly define relationships between all of those. So you can say, this point is the beginning of this line. This line separates these two polygons. So it's a much denser, richer, really analytically heavy data set and much better to work in. There's also grids, that's for raster data. There's a bunch of other raster file formats as well, images and mosaics. But just get a sense, when you're in the Esri world and you're working locally, like we are going to do today, you're going to be thinking about the file formats that are local. When we move into the cloud and we talk about ArcGIS Online, which I think some of you have experience with, we don't talk about geodatabases or shapefiles or grids. We talk about layers, and layers are the data set and the symbology attached to that data set. And then those layers have associated with them services that explain how that data can be used. We're going to be staying in Pro today locally, but just keep in mind that when you're talking about spatial data, there are these different formats for when you're working locally or when you're working in the cloud. And again, when you're working in the cloud, we talk about layers and services. And when you're in the Esri universe, there's so much great data out there through these two service portals, ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World. So Sean will talk about this a little bit. We've sent you all the data. We've sent you the zip file with everything bundled, but when you go back and do your own work, if you're in Pro or if you're in ArcGIS Online, you can pull so much amazing data from both of these sources. So I encourage you to check it out. All right, before we do much more about, before we launch into Pro, we got to do a couple more housekeeping things. And one of them is to talk about projections. And I know a lot of you know this, but when we are working in the spatial domain, when we are using spatial data that is mapped across the surface of the Earth, we have to think about the shape of the surface of the Earth. So the Earth is a globe. It's not a globe. It's an ellipse. It's not even an ellipse. It's elliptic-like, but it's a bit bulgy and irregular. And so every time we take information from the surface of the Earth and flatten it out into that 2D depiction, we're transferring it from circular coordinates to Cartesian coordinates. And it takes a mathematical transformation called a projection. There's tons of them. There's thousands of them worldwide, and all of them do some good things and some bad things. And in California, we've got a lot of standard ones that we can use. You're going to encounter data somebody might send you data in what's called geographic, which isn't really a projection. It's just 1 degree latitude equals 1 degree longitude. So that is not true on the surface of the Earth. And so you can introduce a lot of distortions if you work in here. So we don't recommend that. There's also something called California Thiel-Albers. That's a projection that was adopted for the whole state. So the state of California GIS data is in this Thiel-Albers projection. It's one projection for the whole state. It's okay. There's a little bit of distortion because, our California is a big state. There's another one called UTM, which stands for Universal Transverse Mercator, and that splits the Earth up into these gores, these vertical strips around the globe. And we happen to sit half of our states in zone 10, half of our states in zone 11. UTM is used globally. It's very good. It's a really terrific standard projections, great for analysis. California, on all states in the US, have another projection system called State Plane, which is commonly used by surveying professionals, and you sometimes will get data in State Plane. And then there's a final one called Web Mercator, which ArcGIS Online and other web programs sometimes use this as their default projection for web maps. It's not great for analytical work because it does some stretching that's not useful, but we're going to be working in UTM. Another one thing before we get started with the workshop is cartography and design. Always be mindful. This is not a graphic from our workshop, but from Hopland Research and Extension Center. And it's just to prove the point. You can make a map extremely quickly in ArcGIS Pro, like this one on the left, where you accept all the defaults. But if you take 5 minutes more, you can make something that's a lot more pleasing. And I just recently did one of their MOOCs, Esri's MOOCs, and here's Kenneth Field, our amazing cartography luminary, who's absolutely charming and so wonderful to learn from. And he basically spent his whole video going, don't just use the defaults, go beyond the defaults, dig in a little bit. And we're going to do that today too. Yeah, just some stuff you can work on there. Okay, let's move quickly to the software. We're going to do everything today in the Esri universe, or the Esri software ecosystem, which consists of local is ArcGIS Pro. That's what we're going to work on today. And the cloud is ArcGIS Online. And you can go back and forth between these two. And when you're working locally, you're working primarily with those local file formats. And when you're working on ArcGIS Online, you're working on these hosted feature layers, these layers and services, but you can go back and forth between them. ArcGIS Pro, you need a license for. ArcGIS Online, it's browser-based, so you don't have to run a license. Some other differences between them. ArcGIS Online, strengths are, this is where you create your web maps, your web apps. This is where you connect to loads of apps like field maps, so you can use your smartphone to go out in the field and collect data. Very great, quick, simple analysis, very fast, very intuitive, browser-based. Love this platform. You can also access loads of data from Living Atlas or from ArcGIS Online. Strengths of Pro: cartography, design, projection control, all the advanced analysis we've been talking about, image processing, remote sensing, spatial modeling, working with drone data or LiDAR data, and reproducibility or coding. If you want to get heavily into running Python through Jupyter Notebooks, for example, you're probably going to want to stay in Pro. But like I said, you can go back and forth between them. And if you have a license, you can. So this is what it's going to look like in a moment when we launch into Pro. This is just an ArcGIS Pro typical outline, window. Across the top there, you've got what's called the ribbon. And Sean's going to talk more about this, but it's so much better than ArcMap. You guys are going to love it. And you can do so much more. Over here on the left, your table of contents, that's going to look really familiar, where you have all of the stuff stacked up. We're going to give you, we've given you this data, but you're going to have all of this stacked up. And then over on the right, I've got it showing catalog. We're going to move data, look at data, play around with, data management in catalog. Don't try to do it anywhere else outside of that. But other than that, it's going to be a lot of fun. I think you're going to have a great time. So we're going to try to build some breaks in there. If you're having trouble with any of this, reach out in the chat window, which I forgot to check. And all right, that's it. I'll stop and turn it over to Sean.
All right, very good. As always, that's a perfect segue into what we're going to cover today, and with the software hands-on. There was a couple comments in the chat.
Yep.
One, the presentation that Maggie just gave went out about an hour or so ago. It also includes, here, I'll bring it up. Oh, I'm going to share my screen here. Just so you know, the presentation is being recorded, and a recording will be sent out to everybody next week in case you missed anything, want to review it, or in some people's cases, they have to leave early. So you should have received an email looking something like this about an hour ago. Right at the beginning, there's Maggie's presentation in a PDF format. Following this is the workshop exercise that you'll all need today if you're going to follow along with all the steps. You don't necessarily have to do that. Occasionally people just want to see what we're doing, and then they'll go back, look at the exercise, and then go through it hands-on, in which case you're more than welcome to do that. And we have office hours on Mondays and Tuesdays that you can sign up for through the IGIS website. Ideally, you can try to follow along, but one of the issues that we find, of course, everybody's got used to Zoom, but you still have only a certain amount of real estate on your screen. And particularly if I'm talking and we have the Zoom up, we have the directions up on one side, and we have another application, say ArcGIS Pro in this case, up in another portion of the screen. If you're working on a laptop, that gets to be kind of crowded. So I understand if it's challenging for folks. I'm going to try to keep the pace appropriate so you can get the hang of toggling between one screen or window and another. Again, all of the data has been sent out to you a couple times this week. It's been sent out. Here's the Google Drive link. You just use the down arrow at the top right-hand corner of the screen to get the data downloaded to your computer. Once you've done so, put it on your C drive. Sorry, all of you that have Apples and maybe running parallels, that might not make sense, but for all PC folks, you need to put it on the C drive. The reason for this is that it makes it easy for the directions, and it's easy to navigate to through the exercise if we're giving directions. I'm going to close my Outlook because I hate pop-ups coming up while I'm presenting. Good. Next, what I recommend is putting your directions over on the left-hand side of your screen. This is just my convention. You might have your own, but I like to have the directions over on one side of the screen. In this case, that was Maggie's presentation. Here are the directions.
We got a couple chats
Yes.
saying that's not what's in some people's emails. So we could.
Did that not look?
It
like...
didn't to some people. So what was the title of the email that you want that has everything in it? Just show us that again.
Let's see here. It should be.
Yeah, so
title.
You guys who chatted, that's not what you got?
And that went out to. Okay. There seems to be. Oh. Somehow some of that information didn't get sent. I see the email list is short. Bear with me just for one moment. Let me check the yes, somehow the afternoon one didn't have quite the whole entire email list.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks for pointing that out, you guys.
Somehow in the copy and paste, that didn't work. I'll go back and I'll resend that right now since it's only in my email. All right, great. All right, I'm going to reply all. Now that looks like the right number of people.
All right.
All right, great. There we go. Now it should be in your folder. All right. So again, yes, download this. One of the number one things that we've had with technical difficulties is folks will download the package, which is zipped up of data, and not unzip it. You need to unzip it using some kind of decompression software. I like 7-zip. You might have your own preference, but make sure that's unzipped, and then you can delete the zip file or the compressed file so you can spare a little room on your drive. Once it's on your drive, then you'll have a working folder. Sometimes during the exercise, it'll be referred to as the working folder in the directions. All right, good. Hopefully everybody's good there. So the workflow, what I'm going to do right now, because I know some people haven't downloaded everything. If you're having any technical difficulties with the software, we have Robert Johnson here. He's an expert on these sorts of things. We can set you up into a breakout room or help you during the breaks. I'm going to try to have sufficient breaks. That's one of the big asks that we have during our workshops, to make sure that we have enough breaks, and we can combine those with technical support as well, so the flow of the workshop and exercise go well. I'm going to spend the next maybe 15-20 minutes just doing a show and tell. You don't have to follow along right now. It's better sometimes to just see what the layout is of the software. I already have the data loaded in. One of the things Maggie touched on was that ArcGIS Pro has a contextual ribbon. And what that means is that if you have certain types of data in your window, you can only use certain types of functions. And for that reason, if I were to show you ArcGIS Pro without anything in the window, I wouldn't be able to show you some of the buttons and levers. If you have any trouble, if you're not following along, we're going to repeat this stuff in a practical sense after we take a break in a little bit. Once you bring in ArcGIS Pro, this is going to be what we're working towards today. So you can kind of have an idea of the direction we're going, is to create a product. And like Maggie said, it just takes 5-10 minutes of time sometimes to turn something that's kind of just default funky to something that's really cool and sometimes funky. And so we're going to try to work toward this, and there's going to always be creative kind of license when it comes to maps. What you like might not be quite what I like, but there are principles that we'll try to touch on. I'm not going to go into too much detail at the end about the cartographic aspects of mapping, because we're going to have a workshop that's going to be 3 hours long about that on December 10th. So you'll get a chance to actually get really all the ins and outs of this, because that's a whole new process. This is what we're going to work towards. For now, I just want to explain some of the terminology, because I know we're not born with the lexicon of all acronyms and terms GIS, and there are a lot of them. And I almost feel like I should apologize every time before we start a workshop, because it's just one acronym after another. If we're talking about digital surface models and just calling them digital DSMs, we're talking about NDVI, which is Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. There's all kinds of acronyms we throw out there. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat. We have Maggie, Ben, Robert, all here to help. They can filter those, either answer them in the chat or pass that on to me, and I'm more than happy to answer questions. And sometimes those questions could be held for the breaks. Like I said, I'll try to have sufficient breaks. So when we refer to the contents pane, or just panes in general, what we're referring to is these windows generally on the side. Sometimes they can be undocked. I like to leave them docked on the side. If they get undocked, I can click them back into place. Some people have different preferences to the way they like things laid out. The default in my preference is to have the contents on the left side of the window. And as you add layers, this is going to get really complicated or confusing sometimes with too many things there. And so we're going to go through organizing that data. On the other side, we're going to have other panes that are going to pop up. These panes include the catalog pane. There's different, there's geoprocessing pane. So if I click on geoprocessing, I'll get a geoprocessing pane pop up. So when it says panes, this is what we're referring to. If we say the window, Generally, that's referring to the center of the screen. You can see this is one of the neat things about ArcGIS Pro versus the traditional ArcMap application, is that you can have multiple things going on in your window at the same time. Instead of just having the binary map window and layout view, now you can have multiple layouts and multiple maps all within one project. So you add essentially another dimension of things you can work with. It really is a cool thing. For those of you, I saw a couple of you that are used to ArcMap, that's going to help your learning curve quite a bit. But initially, it's maybe going to be a shock to get used to where everything is at. Fortunately, one of my favorite things is the search function. I should have left that. Oh, the geoprocessing is up here. If you already know the terms, for example, hillshade, you still have all those processes there. One of the slight differences with ArcGIS Pro versus the traditional ArcMap is that everything falls into a category called geoprocessing tools. So there's almost not everything, but most things that affect data in one way or another are referred to as geoprocessing tools. Fortunately, there's a bunch of different ways to get to tools within ArcGIS Pro across the ribbon, and I'm going to start across the top, and you'll see how that comes to be here in a moment. Most of the time, we'll be working in the map pane, but then sometimes you'll want to switch to the next tab, which would be the insert. You can insert different types of objects, connections, that sort of thing. You can add new maps, new layouts, which we'll get to during the exercise. When it gets to analysis, then you have the tools that are the same as the geoprocessing tools here. We can view geoprocessing. Again, I said there's a couple different ways you can get to things, this being one. In view, there's also geoprocessing when the view of the window as well. Editing, we won't dive into this too much, but I do want to mention that throughout the exercise, there's a bunch of optional sections. If you were you're already pretty familiar with GIS in general, you might be able to zoom through this entire exercise easily in 2 hours. But because most people here are not kind of already adept at this sort of software application, the learning curve is going to be a little bit steeper for a while, and it's going to slow down the way that we do the presentation. That said, though, for those of you that are cruising through it fairly quickly, you can go ahead and referring to the exercise directions and proceed at your own pace. So, but with that, there is a section about how to edit. When we formulate these exercises, the way that I've always looked at it is I try to provide all the information, or as much of the information as I can, for the things that I wished I knew when I first started doing GIS. And it's kind of hard to say, oh yeah, their editing is important, but I don't want to include that in there. So what I've done as an option is include an editing section, and we can skip through it in the exercise presentation without it having any kind of effects on the final product. Those are just extra learning steps in case you want to refer to them. Part of it is what that kind of means is that in the exercise text, there's about 10 pounds of great information in a 5-pound presentation that we can provide. So moving on, there's the editing tab. Imagery, one of the things about the contextual ribbon is if you have an image highlighted, you're going to have different functions that are going to be available under different tabs. Again, that's a contextual ribbon. If I'm on a polygon, which is a shape, polygon referring to something that has point edges, like nodes as vectors around an object, versus something that is more like a picture, then you're going to have different operations that are possible on that given feature. In this case, if I click on a DSM or digital surface model, then I'll have more options available. Then there's sharing and appearance. Appearance is one thing that we'll work with quite a bit this exercise, because we're kind of moving toward a little bit of a cartographic aim for the results. So appearance is going to be key, because there we're going to have options to work with the symbology, or another term for that is the style of the features that you're seeing on your map. And we'll return to some of this, more of this information later on. And then data is ways that you can create charts and export your data in different ways. Back to map. So this is something, I might repeat it later if someone has questions, but this is something important to know. If you ever get hung up where you have, here, I'll give you an example. If I have a selection tool activated and I try to do anything on the map, I won't be able to move things. I won't be able to, you'll get lost. How can I do the next step? If you ever get stuck like that, go back to map and go to explore. Once you have explore, then you can move your objects, you can scroll around, your navigation will work appropriately then. So that's the trick, going back to map and then explore is and with that said, hopefully everybody here has a mouse or a trackball, because ArcGIS Pro, as a lot of the newer GIS applications, you really need to have a roller ball on your mouse so you can get around, navigate easily. Selection, that refers to selecting attributes that we'll come back to. And then there's measurement tools and all kinds of other things here that we'll look at. Moving down. So I just really glossed over it, but there's, at the very beginning, one of the things that the way that the workflow goes within ArcGIS Pro is that you'll generally create a map. And we're talking about the basis level map, not with legends or titles, just the features and how they're going to be organized and how they're going to be symbolized or stylized. And then once you have that all worked out, including how the drawing order occurs in the contents pane, then you'll move that information into the layout at the end of the workshop, or toward the end of the workshop. You can also add smaller call outs to add to that as well. So you can have more than one map, you can have more than one title, you can have legends, and we'll get into all that later on. Good. So that's just a general way of looking at the functions. One of the first things that we're going to do is load data into our project, and you're not going to work with all of the data. You're not going to really, let me say that again. You're not going to be doing processes with all of the data that we provide you. A lot of the data that you're going to be importing into your project is for the purpose of figuring out how to organize and arrange your data within your project and within your contents. So then it can be transferred and displayed appropriately on your map. That's quite a hurdle. Like I said, one of those things I wish I knew how to do better when I started. It's great to just start learning it right off the bat. Once we get all of this data in here, most of which has come from the download folder, the zip file that is on your C drive now, some of that data is going to come from online, including ArcGIS Online and Living Atlas. And this is kind of, for those of us that have worked with ArcMap and for years and years, one of the biggest hurdles that originally was out there was finding data and being able to get it into your project. Now, I'd say there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of data sets available online, free and easy to get into your projects, particularly if you're working with an Esri product, because there's just so many online resources that are just at your fingertips. When we come back after a short break, about a 10-minute break, I'll show you how to bring that data in through the catalog pane, which is one of the panes that we'll see under view. one last thing before we continue is I want to speak a little bit about the data itself. Sometimes the data about the data is referred to as the metadata. And the data that we're going to be working with today includes multispectral imagery that was collected with a drone over the Lynn Cove Research and Extension Center. If I bring the project back up and go to here and turn on some world topographic and imagery and zoom out, that is just a little bit north or northeast of Visalia, southeast of Fresno, down in this part of the state. Maggie mentioned or touched on coordinate systems, which is another one of those things that we wished we knew more about when we very first started, because it's a hurdle sometimes. And when it comes to drone imagery, this is going to be one of the base data sets that we'll be working with today. That data is usually in a projected coordinate system called the UTM, or Universal Transverse Mercator. Universal Transverse Mercator is split into zones, 64 zones around the world, in fact. And California is lucky enough to have 2 zones. So we're split sort of in half. The line for that is the line that runs the border between Nevada and California, running north of Lake Tahoe. Since the data that we're working with is going to be on the right-hand side of that line, we're going to be working with UTM Zone 11 data. Some of the data that we'll also have downloaded will be from the web, and web data tends to be in a web Mercator type, I'd say, quasi projection. It's almost like a geographic coordinate system that Maggie mentioned is depends on degrees of latitude and longitude. So essentially, it's sometimes referred to as a polar coordinate system, with the center of the Earth being the position from which the degrees of, again, latitude and longitude are determined. The problem is if you're out in the field and you're trying to determine how far away something is or what the shape or size of something is, it's really hard to say that's 0.0012 of a degree away, but it is a lot easier to say that's 150 meters away. So the projected coordinate systems will allow that. We'll have to do a little teeny bit of projection manipulation in this exercise, but not too much, but it's important to know. I refer to that because that's part of the metadata information about the data that's included. So if we look at the projection, down through here we have geographic coordinate system, latitude, longitude, the web Mercator, auxiliary, and UTM zone 11. So we have a variety of those. We're going to be working with what's called pack line data. The Lynn Cove Research Center has a pack line, very, very technologically advanced monitoring system where they can collect, in this case, navel oranges from an orchard, measure them, weight, size, color, all kinds of different attributes. I've narrowed some of those attributes down, and kind of analogous to other types of realistic field projects, that data has been tagged with the tree ID numbers of the physical trees in the fields, which we can use, we can bring up the GIS for and connect that data together after it has been analyzed. So think of this as the workflow in the field. They go out, they collect the data, they have an RFID for each tree that has that unique ID. It goes through the conveyor belt and gets all the data collected, and then the metrics about those collections can then be reattached to the trees from which they come, and then that data can be used to analyze, like compare against soil, fertigation, you name it. So that's a little about the data that we'll be using. We have, by necessity, we've had to narrow this down to one field because drone data is very, very, it can be very big data, and you don't want to have to download 16 gigabytes of data for a workshop like this. Half a gig or 1 gig's fine. So that is the data that we'll be working with. So it makes sense what we're using later on. let's take a 10-minute break now. And while we're on this break, if anyone has any difficulties, questions, you name it, throw it in the chat. If we need to, we can go out to a breakout room and get you set up. And when we come back, we're going to get hands-on and start working with the application and all these data resources that are out there. Sound good? All right, let's reconvene at 2:05. This has indeed turned into a nice Friday afternoon. Now that the rain stopped, it was raining pretty hard here in Davis earlier today, and now it's nice and sunny out.
It is just glorious down here.
And you know what? I love the smell right after it rains and then it gets sunny again.
Mm.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, they said over in Marin County, it's been 10 inches for this most recent few storms, which is pretty decent.
Yes, that's quite a lot. That's half of what Davis gets in a year.
Right.
All right. Well, give it one more minute. It's nice to get up and stretch. It's really easy to get used to just continuing and setting and cruising along. We almost forget to take enough breaks. All right. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And we can continue. All right. Hopefully everyone has the application set up on your computer. Again, if you need any help, don't hesitate whatsoever to put it in the chat. What we're here for is to help out in any way we can. And I also, once again, pitch our office hours on Mondays and Wednesdays that you can sign up through our website, because occasionally folks will go through the workshops. Either it will motivate them and they'll incorporate it into their work, or even sometimes personal interests, and then they'll have more and more questions, and it is really satisfying. It's like it's fulfilling when we see the things that we're covering being used in and continuing to be used. It's great. So yes, again, we're more than happy to help. Once you've downloaded the data, I mentioned before, it should have gone into your C drive. In my case, it's buried a couple layers down because I have development steps with my workshop material. But once you get into the data, you will see a workshop data folder. And inside of that, you'll have all of these things from the pack line to the mosaics and those sorts of things that we'll be using. I'm showing you this right now because you'll see in some cases, say if I went into, let's see, projects, you'll see a whole bunch of files that are related to different sites. So in this case, 64 West Field, and you might see 6 to 7 or 8 files that are with all the same name, but with different extensions. And that's because the way GIS data works in a lot of cases is that it will have the shape file, and then it'll have a database file, which is essentially like a spatially referenced table. And then you'll have projection files and like the GIS integration files. You have all these other files that are associated. And it gets kind of confusing, but when we look at it in the catalog folder or through the app itself in different ways, then you'll be shielded from a lot of this. But I just wanted to show you that that's how the data is arranged. What you might do is, what I've done is I've drug this folder over and put it in, docked it in my windows, but that's not really necessary so much. Good. One of the first things that we'll want to do is bring up our ArcGIS Pro application. So this is, we're starting off and we're getting into the exercise. Oh, by the way, if you have any questions, what we've done throughout the exercise is included the names of, or the numbers of sections and then sub numbers. So in case you have a question about subsection 6.2, you can refer to that when you have a question. And sorry about the dog barking in the background. He's deaf, or I'd yell at him, tell him to be quiet. Anyways, so first things first, we're going to start up ArcGIS Pro. You might have to search for it in your search box. In my case, it's already docked, so I'm going to start a new session. So everybody go ahead and do that. One of the really neat things about Pro as opposed to the older Arc desktop is that Pro is set up in a way that it can be updated very easily and continuously. Sometimes it's updated every couple of weeks for periods of time, and then it might not have an update for some time. But when you bring it up, it'll give you a prompt asking you, usually at the top right-hand corner of the screen, do you want to upgrade? And you just click yes, and it does the updates and fixes bugs, all kinds of things. When ArcGIS Pro first came out, specifically with the imagery functions, it would jam up all the time, freeze up, and that was a major hassle. Almost not all, but almost all of that kind of stuff has been weeded out through the updates that you'll see. With that said, as we go on, I'll try to remind you to save your project as you go, because any of us that have done GIS for a long time, you might have worked on projects for 5-6 hours and then have it crash and lose all that work. Now, hopefully there's actually a backup. You still want to save your work. So I digress. Here we are. When you bring up your ArcGIS Pro, this should be roughly what it looks like. I say roughly just because sometimes temporary licenses look different, but since everybody in here is probably working off an UC ANR-IGIS license or account, then this should be what you look like, with the exception of all of these previous projects that have recently been worked with on my case. What I want you to do first is click on map. You can do it. Sometimes people say blank template or start without a template, but we're going to go with map to start with, and just click this. And what we'll want to do is set a location for your project. Sometimes it's okay if you already have the workflow worked out, having the default location be where your projects go, that's okay, but generally that's not the case. So what I'd like you to do now is browse to your, in this case, C drive, your ArcGIS workshop folder. Just click it once, you don't want to go inside of it, and then click OK. So that's where we're going to have create our project at. For the name of your project, this doesn't have to be strictly any given name, but I might suggest something like ArcGIS Pro Workshop GIS. There's different naming conventions can apply, but this is just to give it something intuitive so you know where your GIS project, because when you create this project, what it's going to do is create a geodatabase within this folder in this project, and it's going to be your default for retrieving data or sending data when you process it. So you want to have it somewhere that's easily found. If you just leave the default, it gets buried down like a keyhole of locations in your directories, and that can be a hassle. Once you've done this, so located to your C drive, ArcGIS Pro Workshop folder, in your ArcGIS Pro Workshop GIS, click OK, and it'll take a moment, and when it comes up, you should have a map that pops up. Occasionally, if it's a first time, it doesn't happen on my computer because it remembers the last format of my drive, but sometimes when it comes up, this is what you will see, is a catalog view. that comes up for first-time users of the app. If it does that, we're going to come back to this later, so don't worry about it. But if you have a catalog view in here, you can shut that down for now. So you're just looking at the map itself, and shut it down. And what I mean by that is click the X on catalog. So this is what it should come up looking like. So the first step that we're going to go through is bringing data into our project. And again, in the old days, data wasn't so like ubiquitous everywhere you look for it virtually, but now it almost is, including the data that we sent you. And so we're going to use the traditional older style of bringing data in first. Everyone has their their preferences, but let me show you the traditional way. And so everyone go to the map tab at the top. This is not always, but this is probably the tab that you work in the most often. Go over to add data. Oh, wait, before I do that, there's one step that I'd like to do to just save you time overall. And what that step is I'm going to go to the view tab first. And you'll see in a moment why this saves you time. View tab, and go and click on catalog pane, not catalog view, but catalog pane. And this should pop up on the side of your screen. Under folders, what we're going to do, when you get to folder, right click and add folder connection. It's going to bring me to the last place I was at, which was the C drive. So if it doesn't, go to your computer and then this PC and your C drive. And because I have one layer below, what I'd like you to do here is just click this once, and then you'll say, okay. I'm going to go 2 layers because I have the non-developing workshop development files above that. But your ArcGIS Pro workshop folder, and click OK. Now this is where I said this is going to make more sense why we wanted to do that first. We'll go up to the map tab, click add data. And now, instead of having to go to your PC and your C drive and your workshop, all through those steps, all you have to do is click on folders, or drop down on the expand, which is a little triangle. And then you can go right into that folder and see the data that's within it. You'll see inside of that workshop folder, the ArcGIS Pro Workshop GIS. That is the project folder that you just created for what you're working on here. So with the data that we're looking at on your screen, it's very soon. Next, I have one extra layer of data in there that I didn't share with you because it's about 4 gigs that I clipped from. So that's you can ignore that, but we'll go into the workshop data. Go down to Mosaic. Hopefully everyone's there. So we did is went through the folders, ArcGIS Workshop Pro folder, expand down under the workshop data, and then expand Mosaic. Click that once. Uh-oh, it's got too much. So inside, actually, that's not a bad uh-oh. So what I mean by that is now you can see that within this mosaic, there's actually 5 layers. These layers are, because it's a multispectral mosaic, the first band is going to be blue, then it's going to be green and red. The red edge, which is the part of the near infrared spectrum that's just right outside of our visible range, and then the near infrared, which is slightly further out into the near infrared range. So those are the layers. These are the bands. They're referred to as bands of the not visible and non-visible range. Instead, go back and click on Mosaic, and then just click the whole set over on the right-hand side. And what you'll see is it should pop up in the little the box down below, and click OK. And this is what you should see. This is going to be the field 64 West in the Lynn Cove Research Center with the navel orange trees, the data that first came in, it's going to look fairly good. We're going to come back to this though and manipulate the style of this data using the near infrared part of the spectrum. That because the contrast of near infrared for vegetation is much higher than it is for the visible range. And so you'll be able to see like healthy versus non-healthy trees a little bit better that way. That's the way, but in a nutshell, that is the way to add data through the traditional method. Now let me show you the easy way, like what I prefer to do. And that is in the catalog pane, we can expand the folders here, expand the folder further. So when I say expand, I mean just click on these little triangles next to the file. So hopefully your catalog pane's up. Oh, if you accidentally close one of these, even if you close your contents pane, the way to get those back is to go to view. And just click contents to bring contents back, view, catalog pane, and it'll bring your catalog pane right back up, right where you were at before. So once you're in your catalog pane on your side, if it closed, you can use view, catalog pane. Go into your workshop data. And now we're going to add that data to our contents. And from here, there's two ways you can do that. And sometimes if you're just in a hurry and you already know that you're going to rearrange things later and you know what the data is, then it might go in one place. And if you don't know so much where you're going to place it in the order of the drawing order, what I refer to that is the drawing order is where, if it's on this contents pane, things that are at the top are going to be on the top of your map in a layer if you're looking down at it. If it's further down, it's going to get buried. And you're going to see what that looks like right now. So we're going to start off at the top of the workshop data with boundary. I'm just going to click and drag that and drop it onto the map. And look, it covered up what was below it here. What I could do is grab that and drag it below, and then it'll end up underneath the mosaic. It's going to come in as just some kind of default color, symbology style, might not be what you're looking for, but don't worry about that right now. We just want to get the data into our project, and then we're going to start sorting it, and then we're going to start symbolizing it. So let's do that with each one of all of these different sets of data, except for the mosaic, because remember, we already put the mosaic in there. I mentioned there's another way you can do it if you already know where you want to place it in your drawing order, and that is you can just grab this and click, in this case, the DSM, the digital surface model of field 64 West, and I can drag it over and put it in the contents pane and drop it at the level that I want it, if I already know how high up I want it. And maybe I don't like it there, I can pull it down below. We're going to be working at two different scales here, essentially. One is going to be the field 64, and the other scale is going to be at the scale of the whole Research and Extension Center, which is about 320 acres or so. So what we'll do is we'll drag that first one over, and then we'll drag the next one over, and I'm just going to throw it in here, and I'm going to worry about resorting them afterwards. So I'm going to toss them one in after another, starting with the DSM. Oh, I put a backup in here just because there's one step in the exercise that if it glitches during the processing, the geoprocessing, it corrupts the underlying Lynn Cove DSM, and having a backup's nice. Well, I'll remind you all that are saved before we get to that step, but having a backup for that one layer is useful. And that might have been fixed with one of the most recent updates as well. So I've added the Lynn Cove LREC, so short for Lynn Cove Research and Extension Center data in there. Now I'll go to the digital terrain model, grab that, pull it in. We've already done the mosaic. We'll expand the NDVI. Click that, drag it in. NDVI showing the vigor or the health of the orchard, brighter being more healthy, darker, not being vegetated so much. Pack line data. This is going to be interesting. This is not going to appear on your map when you drag it in. So I'm going to grab this, drag and drop, but you won't see it appear. The reason for that is it doesn't have a spatial reference attached to it yet. If I go to the contents pane and I drag this, the slider down, you'll see the pack line data in a standalone table at the bottom. Just for reference right now, you can see that how it came in. I'm going to right click on this and click open. And what you'll see here is a field ID number for each one of the features. This is the reference number, like the RFID number from the trees that then can get reattached to the tree positions later in the exercise, including the weight and diameter and volume and so forth of the data. This is what a database file looks like for any one of these polygon style features. I'm going to click the X to close it out. Next, we have only two more down in the list. Projects. And I'm going to grab the 64 West field shape, drag and drop. LREC projects, drag and drop. And then the trees, 64 West layer, drag and drop. All right. So that's a lot of data, right? That's not uncommon, especially when you're seeking data or you're exploring the web, you're looking through geodatabases for all kinds of data. You'll end up doing this frequently where you'll bring in one set after another, and then you have to sort through it and figure out what it's good for, if it's going to serve your purposes, if it's going to add an element of cartographic design at some point, if it's about visualization, but you'll have all of these layers in here. And a big step is staying organized with this data. And I mentioned we're working at two different scales. So one way you get this data organized is to clump it together or package it together by scale. Sometimes it's by type of data. And what we're going to do is do it by type of data for now. So we have these two polygon layers here, the LREC projects and the LREC field. If I scroll down, you'll see the LREC boundary too. Let's do this. Let's go down, scroll down, click on LREC boundary once, and then click and drag it up. So it's right underneath the other polygons. There is a convention that you typically layer data with the smallest features on top, thinking points specifically, then lines, then polygons, but sometimes polygons are larger. In the case of this project, this is true. They're larger than the features below. So the alternative to that is to put the smallest objects at the top and then the bigger objects below, whether they're polygon or rasters. But in this case, we're going to put all of these polygons together because we're going to work with them differently than we are going to work with the rasters, and specifically the elevation and the multispectral layer. So what we'll do now is we're going to control click each one of these. So click on the first one, the rec projects, press control, click the 64 West layer, and control click the next one down, the LREC boundary. Then right click and you'll see all these options that you can use to find this data. One of which is kind of neat, is zoom to. So, well, that's zoom to layer. And this will zoom to all three of these that have been selected. That's one way to try to locate data if you're not sure where it's at on your map. So if it's at the top, it should become apparent this way. Another thing that we'll do in this case, we'll right click and we are going to, where's that? Shoot. No, selection, convert. I want to group, oh, group, very top. For some reason, I was thinking it was lower. I'm going to create a group. So up near the top, the third option down, we'll click group. And what it did is it just moved all three of these polygon layers into a new layer group. I'm going to click that once, click it twice, and then I can rename it. I'm going to just call these polygons. Click enter. After a little bit of thought, I actually rearranged the way that the exercise works because this is a little more efficient for presentations and for the exercise workflow, being that sometimes we'll want to work with polygons and sometimes we won't. Now that they're all clumped together, I can reduce them and I can turn them all off at one time. So I can see just points in the rasters, or I can have the polygon in my view. Let's do the same thing with the elevation data sets, which would be anything that's DSM or DTM. So we'll click on one, control, click on the next one that says DSM, scroll down, click on the next one, control click. So they're all selected. And then I'll right click those, go up to the top, click group. You can right click and say rename, or you can do it in properties, but I just prefer to click it slowly twice. If you click it 2 times too fast, it won't work out. And I'm just going to call these elevation. Enter. And now I can reduce these, expand them. I probably want to have my DSM up toward the top, the DTM toward the bottom. And so then if I want to look at this, I can turn off my polygon and see the whole Rex digital surface model displayed. This is going to be a nice kind of cartographic effect that we'll get to at the very end of the workshop. Is everybody doing good so far? I haven't been following the chat because I've been focused on exercise directions.
Oh, chat's good. So
Okay, good.
It would be fun to hear where people are at, or
yeah. So I wanted to pause for a moment.
so far good, doing good.
Okay. So I am going
Great.
to
Thank you.
do one more step, and then I want to take a quick break. I like these like 5-minute breaks every half hour or so, just so people can, I don't know, decompress a little bit. I know this is a lot of stuff really quick if you're not used to it. So what I at the beginning of this hour, I mentioned one of the first things that we would do would be load the data in. The next thing is to work on the style or the symbology of the data. And that's what we'll do here. And when it comes to cartographic principles, one of the things that you'll want to do is make the features that are most important stand out the most. So if your interest is the trees, you're going to make them what's going to pop on your map. You want the eye drawn to the key and the most important features first, and then with a hierarchy of the next important and the next important moving down. So you wouldn't have like a really colorful background and a real dull feature on top of it. It's gonna be confusing to the viewer. You want it to be as intuitive as possible. So what we'll do is we'll start off with the polygons, because it's going to be a different way of working with polygon symbology than it is with raster symbology. I might even turn off the trees for right now. We'll come back to that later because we're going to work with that and do some analysis, and then the final project is where we're going to be working with the style of those. Let's expand the polygon folder or the layer set or layer group if you haven't already done so. And let's practice a little bit with I'm going to pull the smaller one up to the top, which would be your 64 West field. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to, there's a couple ways we can do this. Let's do it. Actually, let's do it the longer way. It's going to be a little bit more, it's going to be more educational. I'll just want to click on this. And if I have clicked on a polygon as opposed to a raster, if I go up to appearance, you'll see above it, it says feature class. Okay, just hold there for now. So don't do what I'm going to do next. If I'm clicked on a polygon, that is a feature class. If I switch to a raster, it's going to give me a raster layer appearance set of options. So I'm back to the 64 West field, and that's going to be the field that we're interested in the most. So I'm going to change the symbology of that. I can just click on symbology here, and you'll get a symbology pane that pops up on the right-hand side of your window. In that, you'll see the same polygon that you see over here under the 64 West field. If I click on that, then you'll see a variety of default options that you can go to. And you can work with these and adjust them further in a moment. But for now, let's just make an outline for this maybe. So we can click black outline. That's the bold versus the finer line. But maybe I don't want to have just a black outline. We want to have it really pop because that's the field we're interested in. And the way to do that is you go up to properties. You could give it a fill color if you want, or you can just go down, click on the drop down underneath the outline color and change it to something like red and apply, and then you'll have a red outline that comes up. I mean, there's not a ton of it's not as much contrast on this polygon background, but when you put that over the top of, say, a digital elevation model, there might be more contrast there then. So that's how we could adjust that. For now, I might switch it back to black and switch the color, the inside color, to red. Click apply, and there we really have some, like, it pops out good. We can use that later, so you can adjust the appearance in that sort of fashion. Another way to do that, just to make it a little shortcutted sort of, is we're going to go down to the LREC projects. And instead of clicking and then going up to symbology and going inside, let's just click on the box over here, and you'll see it'll shortcut you right to the properties of that set of data. So in this case, the projects. You can see intuitively by looking at the map window that the kind of peach color is what you have here. And you might want to have that see-through because that's not going to be as important. So in that case, maybe we go to the gallery. So you can see, again, you have to kind of go back and forth between sides from left to right of your window panes. But in the symbology here under gallery, then you can click just the outline, or click the thinner outline, which is maybe even more appropriate. Finally, let's go down to the LREC boundary. And under LREC boundary, let's click just the polygon over here, and you'll see all the options pop up. Boundary is pretty important, so let's click the bold black outline and go click it again. Go to properties. Let's make it something that isn't usually natural on the ground, like maybe blue. And click OK. So then it really stands out. There we go. We have a start. We have some map elements or features that you can add to your design later on, and we'll come back to this, having these be useful at a later time. With that, let's take a short break, 5-minute break, and then we'll come back to raster style. And if you have any questions, I'm going to check on the chat right now. If otherwise, let's reconvene at 2:42. Sound good? Oh, click save. Someone says they're not seeing the gallery or property tabs. Let me shut down the symbology and I'll show you how to get back to that. If you're not seeing those two tabs, the way that is if I have to re-expand my polygons. One issue might be that whatever you're working with needs to be highlighted in your contents pane on this side. And then the other thing is that you need to go up to appearance, click symbology, and you see the symbol here. You need to click on the symbol to bring up the gallery and the properties tab. So hopefully that works. Oh, they got it. All right. All right. Let's keep going here. Again, we have so much stuff that we can't cover. And I'm judiciously skipping some of the stuff in the exercise material that I mentioned before. Is important to have there. If nothing else is a reference, you can skim through it. I've noted in the exercise the optional sections, just so they're you may or may not want to go over those now or in the immediate days following this, but it's nice to have that information when you need it. Right now, let's shift on to a little bit of style and symbology of the actual raster layers. And one way we'll do that is we're going to take this 64 West MS Mosaic, drone MS Mosaic, and drag it up and put it above your polygons. Don't accidentally drop it in your polygon layer, but that'll go to the top now. And if you can use your roller ball if you want to zoom into it, and alternatively, you can right click on it and go zoom to layer. The zoom to layer is very nice. And there you have your have the orchard. Once you're at the orchard level, this is actually being represented in a false color format than what it really should be. There's a couple ways that we can work with this. One, and I'll show you one of the nice custom default options that you can do. I'm going to close out the symbology and the catalog for now on the right. We can bring those back up when we want. But this is displaying red is band 1, green is band 2, and blue is band 3. And I mentioned earlier, because this is a multispectral data set instead of a common RGB image, this is backwards. So what we want to do is switch this into a red being band 1 or band 3, and then blue being band 1. So what we can do is go to this symbology again, come over here, switch this to 3, and switch band 3 to 1. That's actually a little bit closer to the true color of the ground. Really what it did is brought out a little bit more contrast. Because the intensity of red and blue for a plant are sometimes fairly even, but it just created a little bit more intensity. You can also play with the stretch type. So if this is highlighted, we're up at appearance. So you have to click the appearance tab if it's not already clicked, and then click stretch type drop down. You'll have a variety of options. This is essentially how it's going to represent the intensity of each one of the band 1, 2, and 3, or red, green, and blue on your display. Percent clip is a very common one. Another nice one sometimes is standard deviation, and it'll frequently look a lot alike. Not always, but frequently. We can also go for minimum or minimum maximum, which makes it really muted. And once in a while, these are actually nice to have a different stretch, because it'll create a better contrast with the features that you're overlaying on them. But for now, we can leave it at the percent clip, because that's good. But I don't know. Maggie mentioned earlier, my background is largely in remote sensing and specifically ag and natural resources. And when I look at vegetation and I have the option of looking at it with infrared imagery, that's what I go with almost every single time, just because it creates much more contrast. And with that in mind, let's set up a custom band combination, because this is on, we're looking at it with 3 bands, but we can look at it with different 3 bands. To do that, let's go up to the band combination drop down, click the drop down there, go down, select custom. In this case, what I'm going to do, instead of having red shown on the display as red, I want to switch this to band 5, which is near infrared. So near infrared, the intensity of near infrared will come out as red. Band 2, I'm going to switch this to 3. So green will actually be the red intensity. And then band 1, or the blue, is going to come out as green. So band 2. And then we can rename this. In this case, I would call this something like 532 underscore CIR, short for color infrared, or which is another shortening of false color infrared. And I'll click add. And see, then you have the trees really pop out from the soil. Before, you might have, I don't know if I went back to it, I could show you what it looked like. Let me show you a little shortcut for comparison, and kind of a fun, while I have the appearance options up. What I can do is I can right click on this in the contents pane and click copy. Go up to map, click paste. And so you'll have 2 identical representations of it. I'm going to put it down so it's just right on top of the other. This is not a different data set. It's just a different display of the same underlying data. But in the bottom one now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this back to the way it was before. I'll click on this. The symbology pane should still be up on the right hand side. If not, you can click symbology at the top. And I'm going to switch it back to its true color. 3, 2, 1. And you didn't see anything change because it's underneath the one above it. So we can uncheck the one above and check it here. Now let's click on the top. So we have the 321 below and the 532 above. Go up, click on swipe under appearance. Whatever is selected on this side is going to disappear when I drag it over. What you might notice is that the darker spots on the ground, which might just be wet areas or dead vegetation, those are not truly vigorous. So you get a better contrast of what is actually true living vegetation and what isn't, which is very important for classifications in a lot of cases. If you wanted to change the names of these over here, I could slowly click it once, slowly click it 2 times, and then say CIR after 1, and then return. It doesn't change the name of the file that's saved in your database. It just changes the display file name here. Good, so now we have a color infrared image that we can drag over and see the differences if we felt so inclined. Good. So next step, we're going to work with the elevation data. This is a multi-band image. Many images are just single band, specifically elevation models and something like a digital normalized difference vegetation index. Actually, before they do the elevation data, let's drag the NDVI up to the top, drop it there, and turn it on. You'll see it bright white. Let's stylize this a little bit differently. So now it's at the top. We got to make sure that it's highlighted. Symbology will automatically be on the right since we were just working in symbology, but we'll click on it here regardless, just in case you haven't brought it up already. And let's change the color scheme to something a little bit more intuitive. Something that goes from, say, green to red. Uh-oh, that's inverted. So we can get around that by clicking the invert option, and now we have a nice elevation model. Right, excuse me, a NDVI image of the plant vigor. We can turn that off for now. We can refer to that later if we want to. When at the end of the exercise or the end of the workshop, I want to give you a little bit of time to play with these layers to try to bring out your own creativity and make your maps what you're most interested in. So from here, let's zoom out. Now we'll use the roller ball. But you notice how it's stuck on the triangle now for swipe? I don't know if you all remembered what I told you earlier was this trick to get out of that. And that is go to map and click explore. And now I can use the roller to get in and out of my window. So let's zoom out using the roller so it's framed fairly well in the screen with the whole rec. I could have always done the right click on one of the LREC layers and then said zoom to layer, but the roller ball suffices. I'm going to uncheck. Well, you don't even need to uncheck too many things other than the NDVI. We're just going to expand the elevation layers, roll down so we can see them. So we have the digital surface model for just the 64 West. We also have the digital surface model for all of the LREC. Let's just work with the LREC data. You can uncheck or not uncheck the first one, but we're going to click on the LREC drone DSM. And from here, we want to change this to something that's a little bit more intuitive. So we can go up to appearance again. If it's not still open, it should be, but if it's not, on the right side of symbology, you just click it here and it'll be there. And let's give it a different color. And here, under the color scheme, let's drag down, and there's one called Elevation 1. It used to be called WikWiki. It still is in QGIS, I think. And there we have something that looks a lot neater. It's got a nice impression. So here we have nice coloration, but there's a slight problem, in my opinion, is having that weird blueness around the outside. So one way we can get around that is we go back to map, make sure your explore is checked. We can click on it to see what it tells us about it. In this case, it shows that the raster value of LREC drone DSM is 0.000, so forth. So we know that it's just a zero surface model elevation. And to get rid of that, what we can do is mask it off fairly easily in the symbology pane still with this highlighted over here. Click on mask, and then just click on display background as no value. So it's blank here. You could change it to a color, but there's no real sense in doing that with a mask. So here we go. Now we have it clipped, so you don't have to look at that fringe effect around there. But we can go further than this now, make this even like nicer. And one of the ways we can do that is with the imagery tools. It's just really slick. In the old workshops, we actually had a longer drawn out kind of way of doing the following step. Now it saves it's a big time saver. It's really cool. And that is the raster functions. So and it depends on what kind of raster you're working with. In this case, it's just a single band, but so we're going to have certain raster functions that'll work. But I'm going to just go over here, click on raster functions. You can click it just up above or click it in the drop down. and you'll see the raster function options come up on the side. If you look down, there's a whole bunch of options, surface, you name it. You can, I know that it's probably under surface for hill shade, but alternatively, you can just go up to the top and type in hill, and it'll probably be one of the first ones that pops up. I love search functions in here. And so I'll click hill shade. Under the raster, the top one will pick the drone, LREC drone DSM in the elevation layer group. Hill shade type traditional, that's okay, but I love Pro, and they've made a multi-directional hill shade now that looks even nicer. And once I've done this, I can just click create new layer. Anytime you put in sets, you always have to look down to the right hand corner and click either create, run, whatever the case is. In this case, create new layer. And look, voila, we have a neat hill shade, and it's quick. It's held in temporary memory, which is still accessible in the geodatabase, but because it's just a representation of the surface model instead of creating a whole new hill shade layer, which takes up a lot of hard drive space sometimes. Now looking at it, it's way up here high on the in your drawing order. If you and just as an aside, because I still have it up, if you remember in the presentation part at the very beginning, let's see which one of these is this. This can be the call out that you have in your final products if you so wish. That's the way that I like having this as a call out. The hill shade though now has its own boundary edge that I don't really like a lot. So I'll go back to appearance, click symbology. I'll click outside of it and I'll see that the hill shade of 228 isn't what I want. So I'll go down to mask, click display mask value 228, enter, and then we have just a nice clean hill shade of this features of this layer. But because it's related actually to the elevation below, what I'm going to do is grab and drag this down into the elevation layer group. Probably right above the DSM, I'll put that right underneath it. And the next step I'm going to take is I'm going to click on the hill shade, come up here to layer blend. It has normal, but I'm going to click it, drop down to multiply. And look what we have now. If I zoom in on this, you can see how nice the elevation model with the hill shade accents everything that you might be interested in. There we go. That's a really nice new, almost on the fly processing function that I wanted to make sure we covered under the imagery raster functions. It's just so slick in my opinion. All right. We're making really good time today. So with that, let's do this. Save your project. It's really important to save your data. ArcGIS Pro now does intermittently save in the background, but if something crashed now, you want to have this to refer back to. So save that. Let's take a 5-minute break, come back at 3:05, ask questions, throw them in there. If you have any suggestions, just comments, all's welcome. And if you think that we could be, if you'd like to work faster, a little bit slower, anything, just let us know, and we'll come back, get back going 5 minutes.
When we come back, maybe you can review the layer blend again, because it was pretty slick.
Yes, yeah, I love that.
Okay, we'll be.
All right, let's get going again. So much good stuff. So next step is we're going to bring in a little bit more data. I intentionally left off one of the data importing steps early on, just because I knew that it would just clutter up your workspace a little too much, and I wanted to get a little organized before we went into that. So this would be actually up near the top of the exercise, but it's only 2 simple steps to bring in the data that I'm referring to, but we're going to need one set of the data in a moment. So time is now. So to do this, what we're going to do is going to go back to the map pane, the map tab at the top. Actually, better yet, go to the view tab if you don't already have it open. We're going to click on the catalog pane. Oh, actually, catalog view. My bad. I want to do view because that's going to be something that it's more informative than the catalog pane in some cases. Some cases where you do actually want to get more metadata information about the data that you're going to pull in. Oh, wait.
John,
let's go back to the, yes, do the.
Just real quick, sorry.
Yeah.
Do the layer blend real quick.
Yeah.
Some folks were into that.
Yeah, let's do the layer blend really quick. You're right. Back to the map. So layer blending. Let's do this again. I am going to do that whole workflow again in a couple steps. First, I am going to go down to the elevation layers, and I'm going to drag those up so they're easier seen at the top of the window, right under the trees, and turn on, and it's already turned on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the hill shade. I'm going to remove it entirely. So, and you all remember how the symbology was for bringing up the digital surface model and applying the mask, so the 0. Next, what I'm going to do is go up to imagery, raster functions. Hill shade is already highlighted for me, but otherwise you can type in hill at the top and click hill shade. Point it to the elevation for the LREC drone DSM. Under hill shade type, multi-directional, and then create new layer. Again, to get rid of that extra polygon edging effect, I can click on that to remind myself that it's 228 is the value of the hill shade where it's flat and extra. 228. I'll go over to the hill shade over here. Click on appearance. So hill shade, appearance, symbology. Go down to mask. Display background value is 228, and then that's is not displaying. Oops. Enter. And it got rid of that fringe edge effect. Now here's the blending part that's really cool. And it is so easy and so quick that I can see how it passed you by. So once you've done this, I drag that right over the top of the digital surface model. So they're one on top of another. It helps you don't get things between them that screws up the effect. Click it so it has to be highlighted, because then you'll get the conditional ribbon across the top that allows the next step of layer blending. So layer blending is the second one down, just a little bit right of or left of center. Click the drop down arrow and just simply go down to darkening modes, multiply. Click that, and there we go. And then we have this this really slick layer blending. If I zoom in, you can see how they're just really accented. Nice. Very good. Now I'll just reduce down the elevation model stuff, pull it down below, somewhere below polygons. So now you actually have a really rich map that's starting to display quite a few things here. For reference, and I sometimes throw this earlier on in the exercise, sometimes I don't. One of the things that you have as an option is that you can add base map layers that are different than what you see here. There's 24 of them here. At least the last time I checked, there was about 24, maybe 25 different layers. And you can click image hybrid, topographic, all of these. I'm going to just click to hybrid imagery just for a second, just to change it out. And you can see how you can get a background that has both roads and all kinds of other things. But one of the problems with this base map imagery is you can't use it for your analysis. Well, that can be an issue if you want to really dig in and clip and then do color comparisons or classification comparisons or references. And so there's a different way to do that. So let's go, I'm going to go back up to the base map, and I'm going to just switch it back to topographic, to what it was basically before. And instead, I'm going to pull in some data from online, because there's all kinds of data there. You name it, there's so much data, tens of thousands of layers I mentioned before. So what I'll do to do that is I'm going to close this here because I started prematurely on that. I'm going to go to View, Catalog View, to bring up a catalog tab within my window. And what you'll notice, again, another conditional aspect of ArcGIS Pro is if I toggle between map and catalog, my contents pane changes. One of the things that you have down at the bottom is the portal. And that's one of the reasons why I recommended for this workshop, everybody get an IGIS organizational account login, is because our organization has almost, I think we don't have any extensions for ArcGIS Pro we're not limited on any extensions. Some organizations' accounts are, sometimes the private accounts definitely are, temporary accounts always are. So, but with ours, we have portal access, and that includes all of the data that we've shared within our organization. So there's a lot of it in there. There's also ArcGIS Online data that's available, and Living Atlas. Living Atlas and ArcGIS Online probably being two of the largest repositories of data in the world, and repositories that are spread out between a whole bunch of different hosted servers. Living Atlas is what we'll use first though. So we'll click on that, and you'll see in all kinds of languages across here, because it's worldwide data sets. See a whole variety of data here. By the way, if you want to peruse for Living Atlas data, you can always go on Google and Google Living Atlas, and it helps you search for what kind of data is available to you. But once you know the name of the type of data, as in this case I do, I'm just going to type in NAIP, or N-A-I-P, and click enter. And it'll narrow it way down for us. So we have, and NAIP is the US USDA's
National Aerial Imagery Program.
Yeah, National Aerial Imagery Program. And it's data set that's collected every 2 years around the entire country, sometimes 3 years in some spots. But with this data set, you have a 0.6 meter composited set of images that are both in color and color infrared. And then they have NDVI products that come out with this. And with that, we're going to select one of them. Just go with the natural color right now. We're not going to work with this too much unless you want to later. This is an example of how you can bring in the data. And as an example, what you see immediately is all of this metadata that's associated with it. This is the value of the catalog view versus the catalog pane that we'll load data in from in a moment. And from here, we can just right click on this and click Add to Map. And what it'll do is just add it into our map pane. This is a hosted feature layer. Hosted meaning that you'll have full access to the data and you can manipulate it, analyze it, clip it, a whole bunch of other things. So when I click back, you'll see at the top the color, true color. I didn't use the color infrared this time because we have our own, but you'll have a background that's a layer pulled down from the web in your map. You can click and drag this down below if you would like right now, but just turn it off for now. And let's add another set of online data, that one that we actually will use. And that is tree data from this rec, because we have our own hosted feature layers available. And the way to do that is go over to your view catalog pane. Go to portal, so you'll see catalog. So you have your whole catalog of the data, the folders that you're pointing to on your local system. But you also have portal as an option, kind of a condensed version of that catalog view. Over to the right, you'll see ArcGIS Online and Living Atlas. You'll see organization, but we're going to click on ArcGIS Online for now. And next, in the search options, so we'll click on it, so make sure everyone follow that, catalog, portal, ArcGIS Online, then go down to the search box and type in LREC _ trees. I don't recall if it's case sensitive or not. I don't think it is, but then once you've done that, click enter. And you'll see a couple different sets. If you hover over them, you'll see information pop up on the left-hand side. If you hover over the next one, you'll see more information pop up. This is really important right now. This is really important. We need to go to the second one. The first one actually has an error in it, I noticed earlier today. The second one doesn't, where the owner is IGIS, UC ANR. I assume that was probably put up by Robert, since he's located not far from there and has managed a lot of Lynn Grove's rec data, but that's the data that we're going to want to add to our map. And to do so, what we do is just right click and add to current map on the second one of these sets. It will take a second, and then all of a sudden you'll see a whole bunch of dots appear on your map, maybe more than you want. We're going to deal with that next, because one of the key things of working with point data is being able to both spatially query it and query it by its attributes. And in this case, let's look. It should be up at the top of our contents pane now. You'll see LREC trees. There is we'll get to it in a little minute. This, because for security purposes, it isn't completely accessible by people, but we have geoprocessing tools at our disposal that make this kind of a knee-high wall. And so what we'll do now is we will right-click on the LREC trees and open the attribute table. So what we'll see here is we have an object ID and all this other various information, specifically a field designation. Remember, we're working with field 64 West. So the data set, the 64 West that we have here, these other trees, actually has the same error as the first LREC trees file folder here that was shared at, sometime this year. Has a little an object ID error in it. These one, on the other hand, there's 10,000 or so features, counting upward from 1 to 10,000 or so. Well, this field has some of these object IDs are errored in this other one, and same thing with the one that we downloaded from with the package earlier. So we're going to get around that and fix that. While we have the LREC trees displayed here, what we're going to do is go down to select by attributes and click that so you can see it. You should have your, I'll repeat that, right click, attribute table. When it pops up, it hopefully is docked down the center. You can drag it down and touch it to the center bottom to dock it if you'd like, but I like to just leave it here. I'm going to try to drag over my catalog, but I'm not getting an option to get it narrower. I'm going to select that select by attributes, and you'll see the select by attributes pop up here. Mine defaulted to remove from current selection for some reason, so I'm going to do the drop down and click new selection. So drop down new selection from selection type, click new expression. And this time I'm not worried about the object ID so much as I just want to select the trees for that field 64 west. So what I'll do is I'll do the where, I'll click the drop down and go down to field. Equal to is a little bit more than I really need, so I'm going to go to begins with. So there's field begins with. And lastly, I could do the drop down, what it'll show me all the variety of different ones that I can select from, but I already know that it is F64W. And I click enter and click apply. And then okay. And what you should see now is on your map, if you use your roller ball, that one field of interest now is highlighted, all of the tree dots on it. If you see down in your attribute table, at the far bottom corner, that shows that 307 of the 10,000 or so points are selected, and we could just click on the selected portion if you wish to be able to have those just kind of appear, pop up. Now here's a little thing that's really important to know, is that if you have any features selected and you want to work with those with any kind of geoprocessing with that layer, only the selected set of features will get processed. If, and in other words, if I was going to export this, which if it wasn't a non-hosted feature layer, I could go to data, export features, but I can't do that right now. Just those features would be exported. The same goes for geoprocessing. And since we haven't done any real geoprocessing yet, let's do it. This is a really powerful, one of the most powerful analytical tools of the GIS, of course, is the processing. So let's go up to, you can use view or analysis, either one. You can pick the toolbox and you'll see geoprocessing pop up on the right-hand side. And here, like I said, there's a knee-high wall to get over the fact that it's not hosted. We can make it our own with a simple intersect, with a kind of a planed background, which is our boundary layer. So what we can do is type in intersect. As soon as you get partway into the word, it should pop up in the geoprocessing search functions. Click intersect. For input features, what we'll do is click the drop-down arrow, and LREC trees hopefully is up at the top. The next one, the drop-down, we have the LREC boundary. These are only going to intersect with polygons, so it kind of limits our options here, which is good. You don't have to search forever. Click LREC boundary, and that's kind of just a plain, almost mask-like boundary. And then our output features, we can say LREC trees intersect. But that doesn't quite make sense because it's not LREC anymore, all of LREC. So if you click on that, you'll see that it's got a long pathway with going into our geodatabase. It's not all of LREC anymore. What it really is field 64 west now, trees. And what we're going to do now, because there's a couple different ways you can work with projections. I happen to know that this file is from the web. Well, we all know, we just pulled it down from the web, and it was optimized for the web in a web Mercator projection. We don't really want to have that right now, maybe. So what we'll do instead is change it to a UTM projection. And what I'll do then in the naming, I'll say 64W trees UTM. Now you might be thinking, how the heck is we going to do it? Make it a UTM right now. And this is it. This is a really easy way to go about that, is go up to your environments. So yeah, we're working in the parameters right now. We're going to go to environments instead. Under output coordinate system, there's two ways to do this. There's the hard way and the easy way. The hard way is you click on the sphere, and you hopefully if you know enough about coordinate systems, you could go through the whole UTM, NAT 80 or WGS 84, Northern Hemisphere. You can search through all of these different options and find the coordinate system you want. But easier than that, what we can do is just do the drop down and click current map, and it'll recognize the current map is in WGS 84, UTM zone 11 north, the correct coordinate system for this area. And we're all set there. Just as an aside, there's also parallel processing options. It doesn't really matter now for this small of a process, but if you're doing something like a major stream delineation or something like that, or a massive clip, you can set your parallel processing to something like 100 for 100% of all the cores of your computer. But going back to parameters, we'll look at this all, it looks all good, and we'll just click run. What we'll see now is this pop up in our contents, and if we turn off the LREC trees, all of the rest of the dots disappear except for that field. But the cool thing now is it's not a non-hosted feature layer. It's actually in our geodatabase of our project. So we own it now. One side note there, though, is if you're publishing stuff, you want to make sure that you're wise about giving credit where credit's due if you're pulling data from various sources and you know it and you want to know what you're using. And anyhow, now it's in our geodatabase and we're all set. So we're just about into the last step that we're going to cover before we're going to do a little bit of cartography stuff and render a map that's slick, and we'll be done. And we're just about on time for that. So the last step is easy. This is really easy. Is there any questions, by the way? Am I going too fast? Am I like, I know I'm excited. I just love this stuff. All right, I see some thumbs up. Look to the chat. Great. Cool, okay. Looks, I don't see any questions offhand. All right. I'm going to reduce this, the chat. All right. Next step's easy. Well, I'm going to shut down this table right now, this table at least, and I'm going to bring up another table. And that other table is the table for the layer that we just created. So I'll right click that, open attribute table, and that's this F64 West trees UTM. You'll see there's 307 features. The features are along the left, so like each one of these are a tree, and they each have their own attributes. In this case, it has the field ID attributes that were from the original data sets, plus its own generated ID. This is the one that we're going to be interested in. And if we scroll further over into it, it doesn't have too much information, but it has a variety of things there. But we want to have the pack line data. So this, by the way, I got one highlighted, and I don't want that, because remember, if I did any processing, then I might just process for that one. So there's a clear option there. Clear there, or you can click on the top left-hand corner and it clears it also. What we'll do now is join this data set. So I'll close it now. I'll go over to the layer here and click right click it. And about halfway down, you'll see joins and relates. And we'll click add join. Under the layer, you'll see input join field. So we need to have a field, a attribute field that we want to join to. And since we just looked at it, we probably remember that the FID LO rec trees is the ID. And it automatically recognizes that the join table that we're going to go to is that pack line data at the very bottom. And it recognized also that it has a join table that lines up with that, which is great. This has a little thing, is probably an indexing error, I'm guessing. And yes, it is, which is not important. So don't worry about that. And then we'll click OK. Now here's where it's cool for when it's kind of part of the power of the GIS is now we can go back up to the top, right click this, go to attribute table. And we still have the same 307 selected features, or all features. But if we scroll all the way over to the right behind past the last attributes, now we have the pack line data, the weight, the diameter, the volume, the visual grade, and the roundness of those features. With that, we can actually do a little bit of cool cartography. And part of that is creating some more little bit of symbology for this layer. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that it's highlighted. Might have to click off and back onto it. And then I'll go up to appearance. And under symbology, don't click on just the symbology itself, but the little drop down, click the drop down under symbology, and you'll see all these options. And you can explore these to your heart's content, but for right now, let's do graduated symbols, which are nice. And you'll see it pops up a bunch of yellow spots. This is what it looks like in the directions or on the map example at the end of the exercise. But it doesn't look just like that because it's weirdly lopsided where you see all these dots along the bottom that are kind of larger. And that's not what you want. And part of the reason for that is that it's the field that it's representing is the IDs, not some kind of feature attribute that's interesting. For example, if I do the drop down arrow, so if you see it's graduated symbols, the drop down arrow, and I scroll down, something way more interesting might be the weight. So if we click on weight, now you see a pattern present itself in the orchard. So some areas they have more they're creating more volume. So just as an aside, and this is something that's not necessary, we don't have to do that, we won't do this right now, but in the exercise it explains how to create buffers around these points. And then there's a section on how to do zonal statistics of the rasters underlaying them. So those zonal statistics of the trees associated with these points, for example, the height and the NDVI could be added to this table using the same join process and using the same attribute options. But that is all in the exercise directions for a later time. For now, though, we have the beginning of a map, right? What we can do, and we don't necessarily need to do right now, is we can go in and click on any one of these, because say you don't like the style of or the color coordinate or color pattern that we're looking at. I like the yellow over the red personally, but you might not want that color. So what you can do is click the properties, go in and change the color to something that's going to pop more. Click apply, and see then the trees that have the largest yields are popping out a little bit more. You can play with your colors at a later time. For right now, what we'll do is I'll go back. I'm going to go back. I'm going to switch this to another one, and then I'm going to switch it back to graduated symbols, and it'll be all yellow again. But I have to switch it to weight as well again. So if you miss that, we can go, you can do the same thing up here. You can toggle off to another one of the styles and then toggle it back to graduated symbols, and it'll re-represent it, in which case you'll need to switch it back to weight. And there we have the weight of the field over a false color infrared image. Let's make a map. I don't have a lot of time left, but we have enough, which is a lot more than the last time I tried to do this workshop. And we will have, again, the cartography oriented section here in December 10th. So sign up for that on the IGIS website if you want to learn more of the lot more in depth on the next steps we'll do. And those steps would be this. We've oriented on this, but let's make a nice clean map out of this. And the way we could do that is maybe we just want to have this field and these dots represented. We don't need to have all of the other stuff. So what we'll do is we'll go down and uncheck everything else. Maybe we want these, but we don't want any of the we might not want the polygons. We might not want the elevation. Might not want the world view. We just might want a plain, totally plain background. Is kind of a blank slate. There's a lot of, sometimes less is more. And this is going to be one of our windows. We don't need the catalog anymore, so we can X out of that to avoid a little confusion in a moment. And what we'll do now is go up to the insert at the top. I mentioned before that your map is going to have, there's going to be a map view is what we're looking at here. And then there's going to be a layout view. And what we'll do is we'll add a layout. We just click on this and it'll give you a whole bunch of options. And just from practice, I know that the letter in landscape style is going to work well for this one. So that's what I'll click. So what you'll see is another tab pop up here in the center window, but it's blank right now. And when it's blank, we need to add something to it. And the way to do that is we go over to the map frame, click on this, and then you'll see the map as one of the options at the top. So if anyone lost me there or got lost there, so we inserted a map frame. We included a layout, inserted in a layout, and then we will go to map frame, click this, click that specific map, and what we'll do is we'll go around to the edges of this and drag over the whole thing. And once I've dragged over it, it'll pop up in there. Right now it's a little too small, maybe not what we're looking for, but we can get around that easy enough. There's the thing though, is now we're working in the actual layout view. If I go into the map, I can zoom here and adjust this, go back here. You're not going to see much difference because it's just stuck at that scale. But we can adjust it here as well by right clicking and clicking activate. Then we can scroll around instead of not having too many things having it jam up. Once that's done, what we do, go back, click on layout at the top and close activation. So there, it's just centered right in the center of your screen. So there's something, when it comes to composing a map and a layout, there's what's called map elements. And those elements, most of you probably, you've heard over these, like title, legend, scale bar, north arrow, all of these are map elements. Neat line, that's another one, less heard of there, but there's ways to compose maps and traditionally and sometimes non-traditionally, especially now that we have like online maps that have different kinds of formatting purposes or objectives. Right now we'll go with kind of just with a really nice basic layout that might be appropriate for, say, a publication image. For this, what we'll do, we'll start off by putting in a title. The way to do that is in the layout view, we'll go to layout, insert. So if you're in this tab, conditional ribbon gives you a whole bunch of insert options. And if we go over right above where it says graphics and text, we have the capital letter called straight text. We'll just click that. And then go down. Let's put the title below it this time, just to be a little bit more original. Click it here. Your text might pop up as little teeny. Mine, the last time I did Pro, my text was large, so it's going to look different than yours. With that though, we can go up to text up here and we can adjust this. Here's the way. Sometimes if you click on it in the text up here, it'll adjust. And we'll call this, if we click it in the layout, we'll just say title. Enter. But the text stays the same. I did that just to keep things organized. But if I click off of the text and then click back to it, and click right click and go to properties at the bottom. So just you might click off of it, come back to it, click properties. You'll see the properties pop up on the side, including the text name. So what we will say is Lynn Cove Research and Extension Center. All right. Then I'm going to go over to text symbol at the top right hand corner. Click on that and that should pop across, but that text is really big, too big for this screen. So what we can do is go down to formatting. And hold on a second, formatting, and the drop down, there we go. What the heck, wait a minute, go back to text, appearance, that's what I wanted. And I'm going to do the drop down next to size and make it something much more appropriate like 28. And click apply. And maybe a little bigger. The next one up above 28, 36. And apply. There we go. You can also change the text here if you want the type of text, regular, formatted versus bold, that sort of thing. So you can set that. So we have the title across the bottom. And then if we have it more or less where we want it, we can adjust this later. We can move on and add another map element. One way to do that, click up to the top on your drawing order under contents, under layout, and you can use your rollerball to get framed in on your map layout again. Next, let's add in a legend. And to do that, what we'll do is go to Insert. Over to the far right, you'll see Legend, not far right, middle right. Click Legend and drag that and drop that on the right side of your map. And why didn't it? There it goes. It took a second to show up. But what you'll see is it probably has more stuff on there than you possibly want. It has a whole bunch of information. You don't need to know about the raster. Maybe you do, but that's not intuitive for people sometimes for the base layer. So the way to remove your legend items is this. We will go over to legend on the side and drop it down. So it's kind of odd when it comes to these map elements, you have to work on them halfway on the left side and then halfway on the right side. And then they come together in the center. What we'll do is we'll just uncheck everything that we don't want to have on the legend. This is what's called a dynamic legend. So it automatically scales and matches up to all the features that you're looking at here on the map that you're interested in. But it also matches up to the map that originates this. So we have all of this, including these too many decimal places type. I would say problems, but not really like what you want to see. So to get around this, here's what I recommend. You can click off of it, or you can just go to map. and we will go to the tree layer. That's what is the origin of that feature on that element. And we'll go in and right click, we'll click on this and go to appearance. It's there. Go to click the symbology, and under, make sure you remember this right, formatting labels. So all the way to the right, format labels, you can reduce the decimal points. So it's only 1. See how they reduced over here? There, it's better. Now I can go back over to the feature and change its name to something that's going to fit on the layout view a lot better. An example of that would be navel trees fruit. And then under weight, you can slowly click that until you get behind it. You could say something like average weight. In LBS pounds. There we go. Now, I mentioned before, this is a dynamic feature on your, or element on your layout. So now look what happens. When I went back, it fixed, it's now nice and clean the way that you change it on the map on the other side. It's almost kind of analogous to the way things work in ArcGIS Online too. So here we go. And then if I click off, or if I click on layout view, you can see that you have a nice legend there. Good. So now it's coming together pretty nicely. We got an intuitive, clear legend of what the weight of the fruit yield is. We have the title for it. We can add another, insert another, let's say let's do a shape so that you can add a neat line. I'm going to add a neat line across the bottom right below Lynn Cove. Zoom out, zoom in, zoom way in, and I can adjust these so it's clean. That rectangle, you can go to properties. So I'm not moving too fast here, hopefully. So what I did is I went up, I inserted a rectangle, I dragged it across below the title. I went over, I right clicked it in the layout view to get us and to get properties. I'm going to go to symbol, give the color of the inside something like a dark blue or something. So then you have a nice blue neat line underneath the map. Let's add a couple features that are a couple elements that are really easy. One being in north arrow. We go to layout, click on layout in the drawing order. Again, it helps clear things out. It avoids issues. Click north arrow, drag that in. You can resize it if you want. Note, if you want, you can always use a variety of other north arrows. You don't have to be stuck with that one option. But we have a north arrow. Good map should have one. And we got a couple little problems here. Well, one problem, we don't have a scale bar. So let's do a scale bar first. Go insert, scale bar. You can add it in here wherever we want. I'm going to say, I don't want to put it above the map. That would just be kind of an odd place to have it. But what is odd is that this scale bar now is in miles. 0.0 is miles, which is not a really good option. But the scale bar properties popped up automatically in this element. But we can change that really easy. And that's the way to do that is go over here and change it to meters maybe. Stretch it out a little bit so it gets to 20 meters. We can also switch it a little bit so there's the map frame meters label position is after, which is fine. Let's go to the properties of the actual bar where the position is above the bar. Sometimes you might want to have it below the bar. You don't have to worry if you're not keeping that going there yet, but we can adjust it so it's below the bar. And that's probably good enough for right now. We can click layout view. So only two more like map elements to add, and will look just like what you have in the directions. One of those map elements though is a call out. And that call out to do that is we're going to add a new map over in the under insert. I'm going to add new map, and you'll see a new map pop up here with everything in it. And then I might go over here, double click on this, and call it my call out. Enter. For that call out, what would be a good layer? And I'm thinking that if we go down into these elevation layers, specifically the hillshade's pretty dang good. Right click that and click copy. So you see we're in the original map we worked at the beginning. I clicked on hillshade, right click, copy, go back to the call out, click that and paste. And then we have the that hillshade in there. We need to know where we're looking at on the rec. So what we'll do is we'll go back to the map. Remember, we had in the polygons that nicely stylized, where's it at? I'm gonna find my polygons, there it is. I skimmed past it. This field, and right click that, copy. So you see I did that, I went to polygons, the 64 West field, copied that, go to the call out, paste, and there we have it. We don't need this background here, so we can turn off these two underlying layers. And let's finish our map. Not much more to it. All we have to do, we'll click on layout at the top, go up to map frame, click map frame here. You can see this is over at the top right. Click here. And this time, I'm just going to drag this into some open real estate on the map. It'll take a second, but it won't be at the right scale. If you recall, the way to get around that is you right click and click activate. Then you can use your roller ball to scroll it out a little bit. Get it to the right amount. You can also adjust this down here, where you can adjust the zoom level to say 22,000. Enter. It's about right. There we go. Done. And then I can come back here, click on the layout here again. Oops. Oh, I have to deactivate. That's right. I have to go to layout, click close activation. Almost forgot about that for a second. And there we go. We have a map with a call out. We can also adjust that call out too to get rid of the frame around it just by doing the right click properties and getting rid of the frame around it in your map frame. The example of that is there's the border one. I can reduce that. And then when I click the layout here, there's nothing. And we have a map, don't we? Great. How's that? Only other thing that make it slightly just like what you see in here, right? It's all the way at the bottom. We went through a lot of material, didn't we? All the way at the bottom. is that you could just add another text here. And if you want to learn how to do the shadowing and that kind of thing, which is really slick, tricky things, or you can learn that in the cartography section of the workshop. Same steps would be added though for adding on like subtext, you name it, just through the insert and more text. Awesome.
So let's save it so we don't crash.
Yes.
And then any questions? We're right at time. We've just got a 4 minutes left. Anybody have anything they need to shout out about? You'll see in the chat that Ben put a note that we love your evaluations. We love your feedback. So there's an email on its way to you, but if you also want to click on the link in the chat, you could give us an eval. We totally take this seriously. We like learning from you how we could do better. So we really appreciate that. But any questions for Sean as we wrap up?
Oh, and by the way, you saw my eyes roll up a second ago. That had nothing to do with you. My son just came home from school and he was trying to get my attention. And I was like, I was looking up. I was like, oh, wait, no, I'm not rolling my eyes at anyone.
Didn't even see that.
But anyways, yes, any questions? The evaluation went out. We really love it if you fill those out. I always look at those. And then I also watch the video to try to improve every subsequent workshop to improve on on your suggestions and so forth.
Super excited for you guys to get stuck in on your own projects. Let us know, drop us a line on how this goes. If you're going to be able to use Pro or Maps in your work, we'd love to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So office hours are found on the IGIS website. Let me drop that in the chat real quick. Taking a bit to get there. I don't know why. Office hours are at the website. The website is not coming up for me for some reason, Sean.
Hold on a second. Let me check.
But anyway, if you go there under resources, you'll find our office hours. And there's a sign up sheet. Yeah, there's a calendar to sign up and everything.
Yeah, it's kind of jammed.
Yeah.
Oh, it just came up finally. Here, I'll put it in the
With the weeks we've had, it makes you nervous, right?
Right, yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's under resources. Yeah, it's just /office hours. You got it, Sean?
Yep, I got it. I'm just getting in the chat.
I got it too. I beat you.
Oh, doubled it up.
Yay, double.
All right.
Cool.
Very cool.
Great, you guys. I'd love to hear about how you're using these tools.
Mm-hmm.
Very excited to meet you all virtually.
Definitely.
All right. Well, yeah, we'll say goodbye. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the beautiful weather.
Take care, everyone. Have a good one.